Now, before Peter speaks, we're going to see a short film.
Comrades will recall that the Liverpool 47, in fact, had emblazoned on the party banner, "It's better to break the law than break the poor." From every point of view, we were acting as a beacon to the Liverpool working class.
Comrade Chairman and comrades, well, this is a really marvellous rally today, and I think really when we talk about expulsions, it would be remiss of us if we didn't send a telegram to the witchfinder John Golding wishing him a happy retirement. Comrades, it's just over 2 years ago since I, along with other good comrades, was expelled from the Labour Party. Comrades, all of Mr Kinnock's twists and turns are welcomed with ecstasy by the press barons. And he lives in such a dream world because he believed that Rupert Murdoch, Robert Maxwell and the rest of the gutter snipe reflect and are expressing public opinion. In spite of all the consequences of surcharge, of removal from office, of job victimisation, of crippling debts, if we had the same choice, we'd go down exactly the same road. Because to do anything else would have been a complete betrayal of the working class who elected us to office.
Tonight, live from Blackpool and the party conference, Labour and Militant in debate. The issue, which militant supporters should the national executive of the Labour Party now choose to expel? With me and representing Militant, Peter Taff, editor of the Militant newspaper, and Tony Mulhern, prospective Labour parliamentary candidate for Liverpool Toxteth. Can I now turn to you, Peter Taff? There's a long list of charges there, but significantly Austin Mitchell is saying lop off the head, and there are two heads here that would come in that category.
We support all the reforms in Labour's programme. A 35-hour week without loss in pay. A massive programme of public works. But we say that the next Labour government must nationalise not every grocer's shop, but the 200 monopolies that control 80 to 85% of the economy and introduce a socialist plan of production. If it doesn't do that, unfortunately, the next Labour government can create the disillusionment that the last Labour government created. That's why we lost the general election in 1979.
Ronnie Reagan may need the services of astrologers to predict what's going to happen in the future. Militant supporters prefer to rely on the method of Marxism. Understanding that method, we know that our best days still lie ahead. A great contest is unfolding on a national and international scale, and the prize of that contest is socialism on a national and an international scale. We remain confident that we'll win that prize.
Please welcome the Socialist Party General Secretary, Peter Taff.
You see, it's true, I did have hair at one time. Comrades, that brief film showed the colossal situation that we had built in Britain in the past, and we will build again in the stormy events that are coming. The world, including Britain, is in the midst of turmoil. Like the European continental revolutions in 1848, but also with a touch of the Russian Revolution of 1917, an angry wave of revolutionary movements, because that's what they are, involving a new, fresh generation, have spread like a prairie fire, leaping from one country to another. What is this but Trotsky's theory of the permanent revolution? So explosive and intertwined are the developments in each country that it would take a break in one country to provoke an international movement of the working class. And notwithstanding the general election that's been announced by Johnson, the same process is about to take place in Britain. Puffed up like a bullfrog, he's trying to perpetuate a colossal fraud on the British people. Austerity is over. They're now going to splash the cash. Suddenly, there is no money tree that we heard about in the past. And you'll all be better off. And you might go to bed today, but tomorrow you'll wake up to a new Britain when Johnson promises to limit fracking. If you believe that, you believe any fairy tale. Johnson and the rest of the rich boy-eater mafia who are installed in number 10 Downing Street at the present time, including the previous Prime Minister Cameron, are part of a venal system of British capitalism. They and their henchmen, George Osborne, are responsible for the most brutal attacks on the living standards of working people since the Baldwin government of the 1920s that provoked the 1926 general strike, and of the mass hunger protests of the 1930s. Corbyn, at the very first speech in this election campaign, hit the nail on the head when he singled out not just your average capitalists, but plutocrats who've assessed an enormous wealth and indicted them for the conditions that working people face at the present time. It is a terrible indictment of the gang of robbers and thieves and slave owners, because that's what they are, who actually presided over this system. And it's an indictment of the leadership, the official leadership of the labour movement, that they've not been sent packing by the trade union leaders and by the labour movement as a whole. I could barely contain my anger last night in a programme that appeared on ITV about the conditions in Asda, about a ballot that was taking place, where the workers were supposed to vote in favour of working continuously with no days off. This is slavery, just as those unfortunate victims of the system in the backs of that lorry who died a horrible death are slaves in reality. And the situation has been pointed up by Ken Loach brilliantly in a series of films. We have indescribable conditions in Britain today of child poverty and the working poor. By the very definition and the use of that phrase, it indicates the organically cheap and low wages that exist. The chronic and bad housing described in a recent report in the last couple of days in The Guardian. And what a contrast that in this week's issue of The Socialist, we have a marvellous spread on Buttersfields, where it was the supporters of the Socialist Party, not by describing the conditions, but in action, coming to the support of those tenants and scoring a victory over private landlords. I could fill my allotted speaking time describing in detail just how much living standards of the working class and significant sections of the middle classes as well have been reduced by austerity. We call this planned poverty. Don't forget that not only is this being in this period now, this is a 9-10 year experience. And it explains the current revolts in Britain and internationally. And it will continue on the basis of a continuation of this situation. And this will be strengthened. This mood will be strengthened by the general election that we're going through. One rotten regime after another has been shaken to its foundations by the movement of young people and by the working class. We see now the way that we described at the funeral of Tony Mulhern a week ago, and Paula has mentioned it here today, about the conditions that existed in Liverpool and the marvellous struggle conducted by the Liverpool workers. And you know, Marx once described the Paris Commune and the communards, as they were called, of attempting to storm heaven in trying to take power in 1871. That's what we did in Liverpool. That's what we did in the poll tax, when something like 130 workers were jailed, 30 odd of them members and supporters of the militant itself. These battles will happen again. World capitalism and their representatives like Trump are a modern manifestation of the mad, blood-soaked Caesars of ancient Rome like Caligula. And Johnson is just a homegrown Poundland Trump. That's the reality. This uprising is truly a world process. It raises the necessity of a world socialist revolution. In Latin America, Chile, Bolivia, Ecuador are on the move. What country in Latin America has not moved in the recent period? In the Lebanon, previously a byword for sectarian division, the revolution has been driven by young people and the working class. A colossal movement shakes all the powers that be to their foundations. A complete rejection of the divisive sectarian system, and by the way, of identity politics, which some people recently in our ranks embraced. We predicted this mighty wave would develop, and it's happening now before our eyes. It was in Glasgow where the women struck and got the support of the men that showed the way forward. Lebanon, in a revolutionary upheaval, is just brushing aside the sectarian symbols and flags which have bedeviled the mass movement in the past. And Hezbollah has intervened on this occasion on the side of reaction. They're flying the national flag because it's not seen as sectarian. But that's merely a step towards the workers of Lebanon embracing a red flag. They are now seeking to adopt the traditional methods of the working class of struggle, of strikes, of solidarity, rejecting religious sectarian and symbols for a magnificent unity and action of the working class. Increasingly, the same is happening in Iraq, of all places, after the bloody experience of the Iraqi workers and peasants. The Kurds have been abandoned, as we predicted, by Trump and by American imperialism. And we say to our Kurdish brothers and sisters, don't rely on any of the exploiters. Rely on your own strength. And the world working class is the only force that can guarantee you your demands and your granting of your legitimate national rights. It was the youth who were to the fore in the Arab Spring of 2011. They are now grappling with the problems of organisation and leadership, which was absent in 2011 and accounted for the temporary defeat of the revolution. This is a precondition for those workers to be victorious in the next period itself. It is therefore entirely false to direct the energies of the youth and the working class to the narrow field of identity politics, or not to class politics. Mass waves of struggle are inevitable on the basis of the contradictions of this system. We prepared our ranks for decisively breaking with these false ideas and methods and concentrating our energies on digging deeper roots amongst the youth and the working class, and that's what we've done magnificently in the PCS, and as Theo's explained, what we're doing with the young people today. We fully expected that a movement would take place, but none of us could have anticipated the speed and the scale of this movement as it's developing. Make no mistake about it. This is one of those moments, a eureka moment in history, when the scales drop from the eyes of the working class and the youth and sections of the middle class, and they cast around for an organization and a leadership that can show a way forward. Not just a change in consciousness is taking place, but leaps in understanding. And we say to the capitalists, you've had your day. You are incapable of managing the world economic and social situation. You cannot even grant a piece of bread to the starving millions throughout the world. You've enormously worsened through your unplanned system the environmental and economic catastrophe of climate change, which provoked the young and the marvelous movement worldwide to rise up against you and your rotted system. And this is just the beginning. And we are with the youth on this movement linked to a change, a system change in capitalism itself.
Yes, we are.
You extol... Here. You extol the virtues of your system, particularly when the Berlin Wall was reduced to rubble in 1989. Those of you who are old enough to remember can remember what Reagan and Thatcher, how they gloried in the collapse of the Berlin Wall. It showed that socialism didn't work. It showed that capitalism was the only way forward. Now we learn from the Financial Times on the anniversary of 1989 that actually Thatcher, out of one corner of her mouth, greeted the collapse of the Berlin Wall. In the other corner, she tried to persuade the German capitalists not to agree to the collapse of the wall, and even the Stalinists in East Germany to persuade them not to dismantle Stalinism. Why? Because Stalinism has nothing in common with genuine socialism, with the ideas of Leon Trotsky of workers' democracy. Nevertheless, it's a useful scarecrow to use against the genuine ideas of socialism. A Moldovan worker, writing in the Times, in the Guardian, the other day, said, well, Lenin was in favor of labor camps and he led the way to Stalinism. Lenin never developed in this way. That's part of the propaganda of capitalism in the West. But she then went on to say, Bernie Sanders is right. There are elements of socialism that existed in the East and in Russia that we can learn from, and that is the way forward. There is an organic crisis of capitalism which cannot be solved on the basis of a rotted system. I've given you the example of the horror of the treatment of the Vietnamese people who fled to Britain. And after all, they come from North Vietnam, who'd made a revolution against landlordism and capitalism, yet had experienced this terrible situation. How marvelous it is for our generation to see the Chilean workers under the iron heel of Pinochet in our lifetime were crushed by the elements of reaction, of an element of fascism and so on. How they're rising to their feet and are moving against the remnants of the Pinochet regime. The only reason they've not succeeded already is a lack of organization and a lack of consciousness. In the next period, they will build independent organizations of the working class. Look at the Hong Kong youth. How marvelous it is that they've struggled so tenaciously against the rotted Chinese regime. And all they're asking is for democracy. Well, we say you'll only gain that with creating a revolutionary constituent assembly which can change the society in Hong Kong and appeal to the masses in China itself. Many of these young workers carry their own wills in their pocket because they expect to be shot on the streets of Hong Kong. That's an indication of the marvelous spirit that exists. This broad movement is a herald of a new Arab Spring, except it will develop into an Arab summer in the next period. You have presided over a failed economic and social system, and throughout the world, the working class and sections of the middle class are rising against you. There's a crisis of the system. You even have proposals now for the introduction of a universal basic income to pay people not to work. It's a reincarnation of what happened in ancient Rome under slavery, where the proletariat lived as it was at the expense of society. a proposal for a substantial section of the working class to idle its days, have no social role in society itself. It's also an indication of the desperation of capitalism. They've employed a new term of expansionary austerity, and this is related to what's likely the drama that's likely to develop in Britain in the next period. And the central question is, how can Corbyn win in this general election? There's enormous scepticism, including in this hall, I suspect, that Corbyn, through his zigzags, along with John MacDonald, has introduced a very confused period, situation and contradiction in the consciousness of the people. But look at the tremendous speech that he made at the beginning of this election, where he indicted not just capitalism, but what has become a plutocracy of the organiser of INEOS that crushed Unite in the strike in Scotland, and of all the other horrors of capitalism at the present time. In fact, if he would have had a left, serious organisation in the Labour Party, the Labour right would have been crushed by now. But unfortunately, Momentum dithered, hesitated. We had discussions with them about joining the Labour Party and joining Momentum, myself and Hannah Sell. And we were turned down by John Landsman, who said, well, you have a paper and you have an organisation. Well, forgive me if I'm wrong, but so do you, don't you? Yeah, but that's different. Leave your paper and leave your organisation at the door, and we might deign to allow you into the Labour Party. And what's been the result? The right have run riot. Look at what they've done on anti-Semitism. John Mann, the unspeakable representative of the right, who described me on television as that nasty man, which enormously raised my standing in the eyes of my grandchildren and many others. He's now been made a lord to inquire into anti-Semitism. This is the man, when he was in the Labour organisation, the student organisation, Knowles, opposed an independent state for the Israelis. He just supported a multilateral state of Palestinians and Israelis. And this is the man who sits in judgment on others he accuses of anti-Semitism. Because of the extreme volatility and the situation in Britain, there will be colossal movements that will take place. The $64,000 question is, will we be able to take advantage of this? It's not guaranteed in advance. It's starting from a difficult situation that Corbyn will lose this election. They said that in 2017, and he did lead. And he was the same kind of position in the opinion polls he's in today. But he just raised his little finger and said he was going to introduce changes in the fees in universities, and that was enough to galvanise millions of students to the banner of Labour. It's not ruled out, if he turns towards the left and mobilises the movement, that Johnson can be defeated in this election. It's still possible for Johnson to be defeated by the instinct of the mass of the people of what he represents in a new period, a new desperate period of shoring up the rich and attacking working people. Enough is enough. We've had enough of this rotten system. He and his supporters, I'm talking about Corbyn, should seize the opportunity to clear the right out of the Labour Party. We applied openly to join the Labour Party with the same rights as every other organisation, with our own organisational journals and so on. We were denounced by Momentum and others. What's the difference between what we have demanded and what they already enjoy within the ranks of the Labour Party today? After all, this was the model upon which the Labour Party was formed in the first place, as a federation of trends and tendencies, without even the stipulation in the first instance that they should be socialist at the outset. This will be a form of organisation that willy-nilly will be adopted within the Labour Party, because a split is coming in relation to the right and the left. They cannot coexist together. We've said there's 2 or 3 parties in the Labour Party. How long can we continue with these saboteurs in the Labour Party? The election will represent a dividing line between the past and the new situation that will open up in Britain. This is the music of the future, the music of socialism. Exciting times lie ahead, and capitalism cannot solve the problems of working people. We intend to seize every opportunity to build our forces forward to the building of a mass workers' party, which the Socialist Party can become, as part of the reorganisation and the regeneration of the mass movement in Britain. On that basis, we'll be able to create a democratic and socialist world. That's what this meeting today is all about, of a democratic and socialist Britain leading to a united socialist states of Europe and a united socialist federation of the world. This is not utopian. It's a practical objective grounded in the reality of a failing system and of the working people on the move. Go to it. Join our ranks. Join with the wave of the future. Thank you.